Hey everyone, welcome to WittCode, where in this video I'm going to be showing you how to build a Messenger GUI using Java sockets and JavaFX. So the way this project works is if I go over here and run the server, and then I run the client, so we have the server over here and the client over here, you can see we get a server pop-up here and a client here saying Messenger. What you can do is you just send messages. So we can be like, hello there, client. If we send that over, you can see we have hello there client, and they receive over here hello there client. Nothing much. How are you doing, server? If we say that and send that over, you can see they can respond. You can send multiple messages at the same time. So good. Say we just send good. Then we say I'm doing good. So we can send multiple messages in a row. If you send, like, say, a message that's really big, like this, it'll wrap it around so it still looks good. And if you, let me respond over here now actually, if we do the same over here where that it doesn't fit the screen, you can see we get a nice scroll bar. So then we get a scroll bar of all our messages, and we can just say what's with all the long messages, like this. And then you can see I get a, it keeps scrolling, it scrolls down. But so this project is just, it's not multi-threaded, so it's just a client, just a server. I'm going to, of course, build one where you can add more users later, but for now it's simply just a client and server that can talk with each other. But so this is what we're going to be building. But so let's start building this, and the first thing that we're going to build is going to be, the first thing we're going to be building is the server. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm just going to create a new project. Of course, I'm using IntelliJ. And then I'm going to choose JavaFX application. And I'm using Java version 8, which comes with JavaFX already installed. If you're not using Java 8, you can look up how to install JavaFX with Java on IntelliJ. I believe I have a video on that. I'll leave a link to that in the description. But if not, if you're just using Java 8, we can just use it built in. I'm going to say next. I'm going to call this Messenger server video. I'm doing this window. Now let me close this out, and then also let me zoom in a bit. Okay, and so the first thing we're going to be doing is just going to be working on the GUI. So we're just going to be working on that here. And you can use the scene builder, so the scene builder load here. But the way I'm actually going to be doing it in this video is I'm just going to be using this text version or FXML version to make the GUI. But so the first thing I have is an anchor pane, or the anchor pane is essentially what wraps everything. Let me get rid of these because we don't need this stuff with the anchor pane, but the anchor pane is essentially just allows you to freely move things, place things within it. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to give it a ID called AP main so that we can reference it in our code, which you'll see in a bit. And I'm also going to give it a preferred height of 396.8, or sorry, just 396. I may also keep this on a line here. And then next I'm going to give it a preferred width of 478. And basically what preferred width and preferred height means is instead of letting the application choose the height and width, let's actually set it to these. So that's essentially what we're saying. And then within our anchor pane, we are going to have a tag children, because these are going to be the children of the anchor pane. And one of them is a button. And this is the button that we, of course, use to send the text. I'm actually, instead of using these closing tags, I'm just going to use the notation like this. Button like that. And then in here, what we're going to give this an ID, of course, and this is going to be button underscore send. And then we're going to give it a layout X, which essentially means its X position or X coordinate is going to be 404. And then we're going to give it a layout Y of 338. And then the text, or what it's going to say in the button, is just going to be send. And then outside of this, what we also had was a you can remember we had a text field. And this is essentially just what we type the text into. And so I'm going to give this an ID of text field message. I'm going to give this an X position layout X of 30. And then I'm going to give it a layout Y of 338. Then I'm also going to give it a preferred width of 26 and a preferred height of 26. Sorry, I meant a preferred width of 361 because we want it to be longer than it is tall, of course. And then let's just close that out. And then if you remember, the something we also had was a scroll pane. And this is what housed our messages and allows us to scroll. And I'm going to give these the ID of SP for scroll pane main, and I'm going to give it a layout Y of 70 and a layout X of 30. And then let's also give this a preferred height. Let's give it a preferred height of 256 and a preferred width of 418. And then something that's important that we need to add is fit to width and set that to true. And that'll make it, and then let's close this. And then we actually don't want to have it like this. We want to, because what we want to do is we also want to give this some content. So, because within here, we're going to have a VBox. And the VBox is going to be what allows us to stack things on top of each other. So in the messages, we have like one on top of the other. That's why we're going to have this here. And we're going to give this the ID VBox messages. We're going to give it a preferred height of 248 and a preferred width of 412. And then from in here, for this, we can just have our syntax like this because we're not going to put anything in here. We're going to be doing that dynamically with code. And then we're going to just end our tag here because we've got our scroll pane and our content. And then what we also want outside of this content and scroll pane is we want a label. So we're going to have a label, and this is going to be, put it in here, the X position for this will be 114, and the Y position will be 26. And then the text for this label is just going to be WittCode's messenger. And then within this label, something we want to do is we want to add a font tag like this. And then within here, we make a capitalized font tag. I'm going to have to press Alt and Enter to import this. And we're going to game this. The type of font will be Arial, rounded, empty, bold. So this is just some styling. We're going to give it a size of 23. And so let's just run this to make sure it looks good. So I'm just going to click Run up here. Awesome, there we go. So, got something we need to fix. Let me close this down and check. So the first issue is that our button was in the wrong spot, and that's because we want to use 338 instead of 228. So let's first check that was fixed. Okay, not bad. I think what we need to do is just need to make our anchor pane a bit wider. But first what we should do is let's go and change the main size of this upon load. So this is preferred height 396 and preferred width 478. So if we go into main, this is where it'll be happening. Let's change, our height to 396. Let's change our width to 478. Close this, start it up. There we go, so that looks better. So I'm just going to leave this button like this for now because, it'd be an easy fix. But so we've got our client set up, but we also, instead of hello world, let's have server. This is our server, not our client. So let's run this. Change that to server. There, WittCode's messenger, and we have our server like that. Sweet. So now we can start coding. So first thing we're going to be working with is our controller. And so the first thing we're going to do with our controller class is we're going to make it implement the class initializable. And this allows us to override the method initialize. So I'm going to go over here to implement methods, and we're going to overrun this method initialize. Add some space. And the reason we want to do this is because then within this method we can work with our fxml widgets that we made. So the ones that we created in our sample.fxml, all these, we can work with them inside this method if we implement initializable. But now let's create those widgets. So if you remember to inject fxml widgets, use @fxml, and then you use the ID. So like button send corresponds to button send right here. So if we go here, and let's make sure we import the right one. JavaFX scene, awesome. Check that error. All right, so now our button, so this basically means that our button in here is linked now with this variable here. And then let's do that for the rest. So we also had a text field, JavaFX scene, and we called it TF message. And then we also had a vertical box, so VBox, and we call it VBox messages. And then we also had a scroll pane that we gave the ID SP main. So we've got all our widgets set up now. But now also, as this is our server, we're going to be wanting or needing a server object. And we haven't created the server class yet, but we will soon. But for now, know that we are going to need server like this. And don't import anything because we need to make our own. But what we want to do, so we'll be going back to this later, but what we want to do inside our initialize method is when this program starts and we have all our widgets linked up, we want to create a new server object. So we're going to do equals new server, and then in here, what we're going to be passing to its constructor when we build this class is a server socket. And we're going to give it the port 1234. And then within here, we're just going to catch the exception, so IO exception e dot extract trace, and then we'll just output to the console if there is an error creating server like this. And actually, let me just create this class so that we don't keep getting that message. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here. I'm going to do new Java class. I'm just going to call it server. Close this out. Let's zoom in. And then there, we've got our server registered. And then we'll work on this constructor. We're getting that error because we haven't implemented a constructor in here, but we'll be doing that soon. But now more on this, what our server constructor will take is a server socket object. And a server socket listens for incoming connections, and once it receives one, it creates a socket object that can be used to communicate with whoever connected. So in this case, it'll be our client. So this server socket object will be used to create a socket to communicate with our client. And we'll handle more or give more of the functionality to this in a custom server object. So we'll be able to do more based off what we put in this class. But now, next thing we want to do is after we've created our server object is add a listener to the height property of our vertical box container. So the way to do this is we're going to use VBox messages, and on its height property, we want to add the listener, and it's going to be a change listener. And the reason we need to do this is because we want our scroll pane to scroll to the bottom when messages are sent. If we didn't have this code here, then we would have to scroll down to get a message. So basically this is saying make sure that when the height of the VBox changes, we want to set the value or set the vertical value of our scroll pane to be the new value, because the height of our VBox will change when we add another message. And because it does that, we want the current value of our scroll pane to be the new value, which will basically be how tall the VBox is, which will make it so that the scroll pane will scroll to the bottom. And now what we're going to do is use a server method to listen for messages from the client. So with our server object here, of course we haven't made this yet, but it's going to be receive message from client. And what we're going to pass into it as well is our vertical box, because we're going to pass this in, and then within our server, append a message to this vertical box. And so we will of course implement this later, but know that this method will be run on a separate thread. And this is because waiting for messages is a blocking operation. In other words, our program is constantly waiting for messages from the client, but we want to be able to do other things, like send messages, while also waiting for messages. So to do this, we need another thread to handle this. And now, let's give some functionality to our button. So button send, and we're just going to do a set on action and a new event handler, which basically means when the button is clicked. And what we want to do when our button is clicked is send a message to the client. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called string, or of type string called message to send, set that equal to the text field, and get the text from that. And then what we want to check for is if there is a message. So if message to send is empty, then what we want to do, if the message to send isn't empty, then we want to send over the message. If not, we just don't want to do anything. So that's why I have this little check here. But what we want to do is, if there is a message, then we want to create an HBox with text in it, add that to our own GUI, and then send the text over to the client. So each of our messages that we send over is basically a text inside a horizontal box, because we want the messages to be horizontal. And then we add these horizontal messages to our vertical box. But so if I do HBox, I can create one dynamically like this, and then I want to set the alignment of it to be the center right, because when you send a message, you want it to appear on your GUI on the right, whereas if someone sent you a message, you want it to appear on the left, just like it is in actual phones. And then let's also add some padding. And what this takes is a new insets, which is basically just padding values on the top, which we're going to do 5, the right 5, bottom 5, and the left 10. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create a text object to display our text. And so we're going to do that by just using JavaFX text, set that equal to new text, and the text will be the message that we want to send to the client. But then something we want to also do is we want to wrap this inside something called a text flow, like this. And so a text flow is a layout designed for rich text, which basically means it allows us to style the text more. But the main reason we are using this is because of its wrapping functionality. So in other words, if the text gets too big for the width of the scroll pane, we want it to wrap to another line, which you saw in our demonstration. Because if it didn't do that, what it would do is just add like 3 dots and then hide the rest of the content. But now let's style our text flow object using the style method. So because of course, remember we changed the color and everything. So the way to do that with JavaFX is you use set style. And then you can pass in some basically CSS-like styling. So what we want to do is change the color of the text, and that's done this way. And we're going to pass it the values 239, 242, and 255. And then on a new line, what we also want to change is we want to give it a background color like this, of the values RGB, 15, 25, and 242. Put this out here. We want to add a space here though. And then we're going to add another line here. Forgot to close this out as well. And then the next thing we want to change is the background radius, and we want to set that to be 20 pixels so that it gives us kind of like that curved shape, kind of looks circular instead of being rectangular. And then finally what we want to do is also add some padding on this, and that's just going to be 5, 10, 5, 10, like so. And then the next thing we want to do is for our text, we want to set the fill, which will change the color of the text. We want to change that to JavaFX scene.paint, import this, and we want to do 0.934. For green, we want to do 0.945. And for blue, we want to do 0.996. Now what we want to do after this is we want to add this to our horizontal box. So we're going to do that, we're going to do a horizontal box, .getChildren, and then we're going to add a node to it, and this will be our TextFlow node. And then what we're going to do after that is our VBox messages, or our vertical box. We're going to get the children of that and then add our horizontal box to it. And then finally, what we want to do after we've posted this message onto our own GUI is we want to send the text over to the server or the client so that they can add the text to their GUI. So we will do server.send message to client, which of course is another message or method that we're going to make, and we'll pass in message to send. And then finally what we want to do is we want to clear our text field. So after we've clicked the button, we send it off and then we clear the text. But now let's create a method that will append an HBox to our GUI using the message from the client. So when we receive a message, now we want to append that message to our own GUI. And so we're going to do this as using a static method. So public static void. We're going to call it add label, and it's going to take a message from the client, and then also a VBox. Oh, and I added this actually in the wrong spot, so let me add this outside here because it's static and we want it to belong to our controller class here, and we were placing it inside this method here, so that's why we're getting that error. But anyway, this will be the VBox, or our VBox that we want to add the message to, and this will be the message from the client. But within this method, we're basically going to be copying the exact same things we were doing earlier, because we're going to be adding first another HBox to our GUI, and we'll do some alignment, but this time we're going to want to put it on the left instead of the right, because this is a message we're receiving. But then let's add the usual padding, 5, 5, 5, and 10. And then we're going to create a another text object, and this is going to be the message from the client. And then let's create our text flow again so that we have good wrapping of our text within our scroll pane. And then let's do some styling on this. And I'm actually just going to copy and paste this. We're going to use different values because when we receive a message, we want it to be like silverish color. You can see I kind of took that from like the iPhone messaging colors. But so we're going to want for our color 233, 233, and 235. And then our background radius is still going to be 20 pixels, but we are not going to have a, this should be our background color, because we want our background color to be silverish, and we're not going to change the color. We're going to keep the color as the default black. And then what we need to do after this is on our text flow, set some padding of 5, 10, 5, and 10, just like we were doing before. And then we'll get our children and we'll add the text flow like this. But now before I do so last time we just added it to our VBox like this. Something important to mention is that in JavaFX, we cannot update the GUI from a thread other than the application thread. In other words, we could not be using another thread to add our HBox to our scroll pane or to our vertical box. And this method will be called in the server class using a different thread. So we're going to be calling this add label method within this file here. And not only that, but also on a different thread or using a new runnable. If you have questions on runnables, I also have a video on that. So you can look that up. I'll leave it in the link to it in the description. But you'll see this again later, but just keep that in mind for now. But anyway, the way you make sure you are updating the GUI from the application thread is by using the class platform, so JavaFX platform, and then the method run later. And this platform class is a utility class, meaning it only contains static methods, and one of them being run later. And then what we pass to this is a new runnable object. And what this class will do is run the provided runnable here on the JavaFX application thread. Because remember, in Java, runnables are objects to be run by a thread or an object of the thread class. But so what we want to do here is append the HBox containing the message from our client to our GUI. So we're going to do vbox.getChildren.add hbox like this. So you can see the difference is here, we just add it like this, get children, but here we have to actually do platform.runLater because we're going to be calling this method within our server class, and not only that, but in a different thread. And you can only update the JavaFX GUI with the JavaFX application thread. But so this was our whole controller class for our server. So now let's create our server class. So let's go into this here. And the first thing we should do for our server class is create all our variables for our server object. And the first is the server socket object. So private server socket. And remember, a server socket is used to listen for incoming connections, and when it receives one, it creates a socket object to communicate with whoever connected. So now let's create that socket that we will use to communicate. javanet.socket. And this will of course be the socket that we'll use to communicate with our client. And then what we'll need is a way to read data from the client, which we're going to use a buffered reader, port this. And so real quick, the way a socket allows communication is through streams. A socket has an output stream that we can write content to and an input stream that we can read information from. And our buffered reader, this is what we're going to be reading information that the client has sent to us. Or we're going to be using this to read information that the client has sent to us. But our buffered reader will wrap the input stream that this socket object here provides. So basically this is going to help us improve efficiency because it's a buffer. But overall, our buffered reader is what we will use to read messages that the client has sent to us. And then finally is our buffered writer. So we're going to do buffered writer like this, and this will wrap our socket's output stream so that we can send messages to the client more efficiently. But now let's create our server constructor. So I'm going to do a shortcut of Alt Insert, type constructor, and I'm just going to select the server socket object. And so if you can remember, this constructor takes a server socket object which we passed from our controller. So this error should be gone now up here because we're passing it in here where we create our server. But now next, we will use our server socket's accept method to return a socket object. We're going to do this.socket equals server socket.accept. And this method here, this accept method, is a blocking method, meaning that the program will halt here until a client connects to us. And when it does, and then what it does is return the socket object we can use to communicate with our client. So our server socket will listen for an incoming connection. When it receives one, it'll create an object that will allow us to communicate with whoever we form that connection with. And now let's create our streams. So remember, a socket has an output stream for writing content to who we are connected to, and an input stream to read content from who we are connected to. So what we can do here is we can do socket.get input stream if we want to get what they've sent to us. And then another important concept here is that in Java, there are two types of streams. There are character streams and byte streams. And as they imply, character streams send over characters, while byte streams send over bytes. And as this is a messenger, we want to use character streams because we're sending over characters or words. And you know if a stream is a character stream if in Java it ends with either reader or writer. So like buffered reader, buffered writer, that means that it'll be using a character stream. So what we want to do here is wrap our input stream from our socket with a character stream. And we can do that with new input stream reader and wrap that like this. And then to improve efficiency, we use our buffer. So that's when we have new buffered reader equals new buffered reader, and then we wrap it again. And then let's just repeat this process with our buffered writer. So we're going to do new buffered writer, and in here a new output stream writer, and then in here we're going to get the output stream from our socket. And now after this, let's just work with our errors if we get any. So I'm going to wrap all this in a try catch block like so. I'm just going to do catch. It's an input output exception. What we'll do is we'll outprint error creating server, and then let's print the stack trace as well. And one thing though that we want to do if we do get this error is we want to close down our socket and streams. Whenever you aren't using your socket or streams anymore, you should always close them to ensure that you aren't wasting resources. This is also just a good practice to get into, but we will do this by using a method called close everything that I will create now. So it's going to be called public. It's not going to return anything, so it's going to be void. And it's going to take a socket object, a buffered reader, and a buffered writer like this. And so what this method will do is essentially gracefully close our socket and streams. And we're doing this because there could be several times where we want to close everything. But so we don't want to just keep repeating that over and over again. We'll just make like a nice method to do that for us. So for each of these, I'm going to wrap it inside a try catch block, then IO exception, and we'll just print the stack trace. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to check if each one of these is null. And if it is, we're going to close it down. Because if we don't do a null check, then it could close it down on, then we could get a null pointer exception. So that's why we're doing that null check here. And then we have to do it for our socket as well. Close that down as well. And so something I want to note as well is that we're closing down our buffered stream, and what that will do is it'll also close the underlying streams, because remember we wrap the input output streams from the socket, and then we wrap those with another input stream output stream. If we close this one, it'll close all the underlying streams, so we don't have to also close like the input stream reader we're doing here and the socket's input stream, as that'll happen automatically. But now let's create our method that will send a message to the client. So it's going to be public void send message to client, and it's going to accept a message to the client like this. And so remember, this method is called from our controller whenever the send button is clicked. But what we need to do here is use our buffered writer to send over the message. And we will do this with the method write. So we do buffered writer dot write. And then what we want to write over is our string, or the string message to the client. But something that we need to do now is send over a new line character. And we can do that by saying new line. And this is because our client will keep expecting more characters from our stream until we send over a new line character. So sending over a new line character is essentially saying this is the end of the message. Because if not, the client will keep expecting more and more message to come, so it won't ever think it actually got the message essentially. And then finally, as we are using a buffer, it is only sent when the buffer is full. And as these messages will most likely not be very large, so we need to manually flush the buffer. And we can do that by buffered writer dot flush. And then let's also catch, wrong thing here. Let's do an input output exception. Print the stack trace. And then let's also just output something like error sending message to the client. And then we're also going to use our close everything method, and we'll do socket buffered reader and then buffered writer. And actually, let's also just do that up in here. We're having null checks anyway, so just place that up there. But now the final method we need to make is with our server is the method to receive messages from the client. So it's going to be public void receive message from client, and then we pass in what it takes is a VBox, or the vertical box for adding the messages to. So remember, this method needs to be run on a separate thread so that our whole program isn't blocked by constantly waiting for messages from the client. And so to do this, we will create a new thread, so new thread, and then pass it a runnable object. And so whatever is placed inside this run method here will run on a separate thread. And what we want to do is listen for messages while the client is still connected. So we'll do while socket.is connected, and then we'll work from there. But also what we want to do is start this as well, because we want the thread to be executed, and that's done by the method start. But so what we will do is first read the message from the client using our buffered reader. So we're going to do message from client equals buffered reader dot read line. Because remember, when we are sending messages in this program, we send over a new line character to tell the buffered reader that there is no more data coming. So when we read a new line character, this basically signifies the end of the message. So you can see it writing up here. We're going to write over a message. We'll write over a new line, we'll flush it, and then when it writes over this new line and flushes it is when we would read it. Of course, this would be with the client sending and the server receiving, and vice versa. Like these two methods, of course, aren't interacting, but that's just how it's going to work. And then what we want to do is add this to our GUI using our static method we made in our controller class. So remember, we have controller.addLabel, and then we want to pass in our message from the client, and then our VBox like this. And the reason this VBox is being passed to this through this method like this is because in here, this is a static method, and our VBox here is not a static variable, so we cannot actually access it in here. So what we're doing is we're just going to pass it as an argument. And then after this, what we want to do is we need to wrap this in a try catch, like so, and then just the usual input-output exception, like this, and we can just print out like error, receiving message from the client like this, and then something, and then we'll close everything down again. So socket, buffered reader, buffered writer, and then something also that's important that we need to do is if there's an error, we also want to break out of this while loop, because if not, there is an error, it would just continually running this and then like run this error over and over again. So we need to make sure that we break out of it. But so this was our whole server. So we've made the server now. So all we need to make is our client. And this is honestly basically exactly the same as this server here, except it uses a custom client class that we will build instead of the custom server class that we made here. But the way I'm going to be doing this, I'm just going to create another project. And it's going to be a JavaFX project again. And this one I'll call, forgot what I called the other one, Messenger Client Video, because this is going to be our client. And then let's open up in a new window. And then the first thing I'm going to do in here is I'm going to create our client class. So we're going to have client. Then let me also zoom in a bit. Close out this. And then what we can do actually is our fxml, it should be the exact same. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go into our server, into our fxml file. I'm going to copy and paste this into here. And then I think that should all be good if we do that. And then after that, I'm also going to go to the server and click on main, and I'm going to copy and paste this width and height as well. So let's go into here, make this a bit bigger as well, and copy and paste those into here. Add that extra parenthesis. And then let's just run this, see if it works. So, okay, awesome. Yep, so that looks exactly the way it should. I wish it was that easy in the other one, so we just copied and pasted. Except instead of this, it says client, because our other one said server. But anyway, to actually start with this, I'm not going to start with the controller. This time I'm going to start with the client. Or sorry, no, let's start with the controller actually. And let me zoom in here as well. And the first thing we're going to do is implement the class initializable so we can work with all our injected fxml variables again. So let me implement the method initialize, which we know about from last time. And then let's implement or add all our injectable fxml. So we have our button called, and the ID is button send. Then we have our text field, and that's the ID is TF message. And then we have another, we have our VBox, of course, and I believe it was called VBox messages, like this. And then we have our scroll pane. So private scroll pane, and we called it SP main. And then we also need our client that we're going to make from our client class. And so the first thing we'll do in here is let's basically exactly what we did in the server. We're going to first create our client object. So when we run this program, we want to create a client object, and what the constructor will take for a client object is going to be a socket object, which I'll explain more in a second. But basically this is the IP address that the host we want to connect to, and on which port. And our server, it has to match the port that our server is going to be listening for connections on, which I believe we declared in here. So you can see our server is going to be listening for connections on port 1234. So we need to make sure that our client is also trying to connect to 1234. And then we can let's just outprint connected to server like this. And then let's do an IO exception, just print that if there's any sort of errors. Let me also decrease this, pull that down a bit. And then so after this, what we're going to do is we're going to want to make it so that the height property of our, add a listener to the height property of our vertical box, so that when this changes, what we can do is we can make it so our scroll pane moves down to the bottom. Basically, when we get a new, set our vertical value, and basically when we get a new message, we want our vertical value to be how tall the VBox is, so that we scroll to the bottom with our message. So I'm going to cast to a double the new value, which essentially means the new height of our vertical box. And then we're going to do what we did in the last time as well. We're going to make a message, but this is going to be a receive message from server, and it's going to take this. And of course, we're going to create this method inside our client class. And then let's add some functionality to our button. So set on action, new event handler. And the first thing we're going to do, the exact same, we'll do the message to send, set that equal to our text field. We'll get the text from that. And then we will only send a message if it isn't empty. So if the text field message send is not empty, then we're going to do what we did earlier when we created our horizontal box like this to house our text. And we of course set the alignment to be on the right side of the device or the GUI, because it's what we're sending, and we want what the user sends to be on the left side. And then let's set our padding. So we're going to do, what happened there? We're going to do our horizontal box. We're going to use set padding, pass in a new insets object, and do 5, 5, 5, 10, like so. And then we're going to create our text object, exactly how we did last time. This will be message to send. We're going to create our text flow, so we can add more styles to our text. And we passed in our text object like that. And then we'll do, of course, the set style. And for this, I'm actually just going to copy and paste from our server, because it should be the exact same. And I can actually just copy and paste all this too. Actually, I can copy and paste all this except for the server part. So I'll just put this all in here, like so. And then instead of server, we'll have client, and this will be send message to server. And besides that, we have everything else should be the exact same. So we get our horizontal box, we add the text flow to it, which holds the text that the user typed in. And then we add that to our vertical box, because we want our horizontal messages stacked on top of each other. And then we send just the text over to our server and then clear out the text field. And now after this, let's create our, so outside of this, inside the class, let's create our static add label method, which will be string message from server, and then our vbox that we want to add that message to. And then this will also be the exact same, because remember, this is where we're going to be adding the label, but instead of from the client, it'll be from the server. This is where we add whatever the server has sent us, in this case, to our GUI. So I'm actually going to go back to our server, and I'm going to cut and paste all this here. So hopefully copy and pasting is never that good. You usually get quite a few errors, so hopefully we don't get too many when we run this program, but I guess we'll see. And then vbox there. So that should be good here. So what we're doing is we're creating the horizontal box to hold our text. We're styling it with a text flow and adding some padding and everything. Then we add that to our horizontal box. And then remember, we can't access the GUI from any thread besides the application thread. So we have to use platform.runLater, where platform is a utility class, meaning it only has static methods to add the horizontal box to our vertical box, which we do with getChildren and then add. So exact same thing that we did with the server. Now let's start our client class. So I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to create the variables we need. So we'll need a socket, of course, that we'll use to communicate with the server. We'll need a buffered reader to read everything that the client or the server sent to us. We need a buffered writer to write to the server what we want to tell it. And then let's create our constructor. And all we're going to need for that, if you remember, is a socket object. And then also what we're going to do, same as what we did in our server, new buffered reader. We'll wrap this in an input stream reader. And we, of course, get the input stream from our socket. And then same thing with the buffered writer. So we create a new one of those, wrap the output stream writer for efficiency, and then the socket, which we use to communicate with our client, or with our server in this case, we use that output stream to write things to. And then we just have to surround this in a try catch. So let me take all this stuff, place it in here. And then for our catch, it'll be an IO input output exception like usual. We'll just say error creating client, and then we'll print the stack trace. And then we're also going to do close everything, which I will make now as well. So, and what I'm actually going to do is, of course, just copy this from the server again, because this will be the exact same. So let's take this method, go in here, paste this in, and then we just pass in our socket, buffered reader, and buffered writer like this. And then now let's do our void, which will be send message to server, and it'll take a string message to server like this. And then it is also going to be the exact same as the client. So I will paste everything, and then I will tell you, I'll just give another quick overview on what we're doing. So paste all this in. And so this is the message that we want to send to our server, which of course is what we pass from our text field when we click our button. So we get that, we send it over, and then it goes to this method here. And so we use our output stream on our socket, which is basically our connection between the client and server. We write this message to it. We write a new line character because our server in its receive message is going to be waiting with read line. So it's expecting a new line character. And when it receives one, it adds that label to its GUI. And so, but we also have to flush it, remember, because buffers don't send until they're full, and we're not sending that much stuff over unless it's a really, really long message. And then, yeah, and then so it'll send it over in that case. And then we need our final method, which will be receive message from server, and of course it takes a VBox like this, and then so that is coming in up here. So we're receiving messages here on another thread, or listening out for messages, I guess I could say. And this once again will be the exact same. So in our server, let me take this, and once again I'll just do a quick little run through, paste that in. So we create a new thread because we don't want our whole program to just be waiting for a message, because this is a blocking operation, and so we won't be able to do anything until we receive a message. So we make a new thread for this, and a thread takes a runnable, which is essentially something that can be executed on a new thread. And so while our socket is connected, we're going to get a message. This will be message from server, and then so we wait for that new line to come, and when it does, we call our add label method in here. Where is it? At the bottom here, which will add it to our GUI. So we've got controller.addLabel. Let me just double check our, sample.controller. Cool, but so this should be the whole program. So let me start this up to make sure. Yeah, and you call start to make sure you run this, close everything down, break out of this loop if there's an error, so we don't just constantly keep throwing this. And then, yeah, so that should be good. So let me put these side by side. And then what we're going to do first is we're going to run our server. Then after that, we're going to run our client. So we've got our client over here and our server over here. Now let's cross our fingers. Hello, client. Yep, and we got some errors, so let's see what those are real quick. Close these down. Okay, but so the issue was everything, it was all about these set text styles. So I was missing a parenthesis here, and also you need to end each one of these with a semicolon. So I missed a parenthesis, and then there's semicolon, semicolon. You have to put one after each, and I had to do that as every time I use this set style method. So make sure that this RGB function is closed and that there are semicolons at the end, even like this one here was tripping me up as well. Of course, the source code is on my website, so you can just copy and paste that from that. But that is, I believe that was everything. So now if we run this for a second time, maybe second time's a charm instead of the third time. Let's see if this works. So this is our server. Hello, client. How are you doing? Like this? Awesome. So it's sent over. Good. How are you, server? And then, very well, subscribe to WittCode. Completely butchered that name, but and then yes, I will. And then let's just double check, send multiple. You can send more than one. And then let's do our spamming. That annoying person who sends huge text messages. Looks like it's doing fine. Awesome. And every time we send one, it moves to the bottom. So that was my video on creating just a simple little messenger with a client and server. I'm definitely going to be doing a group chat after this, so be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions, just reach out in the comments. I'm getting more comments now every day, so I can't get back as quickly as I used to, but I'll try my best. And then besides that, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.